Today's amazing guest is Tanner Christensen, who is a curious multidisciplinary design leader who is dedicated to helping designers and businesses find the best in each other. He's a founder at Shape and previously worked as head of design at GEM. Before GEM, Tanner designed software for autonomous vehicles at Lyft, led design of the Atlassian mobile platform, and designed for 2.85 billion people at Facebook. He's a published author, prolific writer, indie app developer, angel investor, podcaster, and more. That is just amazing, Tanner.
There's a lot there. Yeah.
You have achieved a lot in a short span of time, is what I want to say.
Has it been a short amount of time span? It feels like it's been a very long time from where I'm sitting.
It's almost like when you see from the other side, it's like kind of like the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. Like I look from where I am, I'm like, oh my God, he's achieved so much. But then you're like, from my perspective, it's been a long haul.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I was worried yesterday, so I was off for the long weekend. Me and my friends rented a cabin in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, and we were playing poker, and I was shouting so much, and my voice was gone yesterday, and I was like scared. In the morning, I was like, I hope my voice comes back for the interview.
Well, you sound great, so no worries from that side. Do you feel okay, though? I think that's important.
I do. I think the excitement is driving me forward.
I love it. Well, I know you and I have talked for a very long time about recording this, and finally here we are, some years later.
2 years later. Well, not 2 years, a little bit less than that.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I'm excited. It's been a while. I actually took a break from podcasting. For those who know me, I stopped podcasting for a while, and finally I'm catching my breath, I feel like, and it's time to get back on the train.
So tell me a little bit about it. You started the New Layers podcast. So what was your motivation to start the podcast?
Yeah, so New Layer was a podcast that my wife and I, Jasmine Friedel, decided to do after working. We both worked at Facebook. That's where we met each other many years ago. And her and I just found that some of the conversations we would have over dinner or anything were kind of interesting. And we felt so fortunate to be where we were at in our careers. We said, hey, what if we kind of shared this knowledge in a very casual podcast format with others? And so that's kind of where it started, is let's just try this conversation approach to podcasting and see if we can help others with just sharing our experiences.
And it got a huge amount of traction. Can you talk about the traction? What was that like for you?
Yeah. So it's funny when you talk about, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. Podcasts are very interesting in that there's not really a lot of analytics around it. There are some tooling, but it's hard to really determine where your audience is, repeat listeners, all of those kind of things. So a lot of my past projects have done fairly well. We're talking like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users or audience members. And New Layer just never reached that level. I think we've got maybe tens of thousands of listeners over the span of a little over a year. And even today, people are still messaging us saying, oh, thanks for this, I love this. But it just never reached that level where I felt it was a hit or a success,
So did you, you've had a lot of past successful projects. So did that mean that this new endeavor you're starting with the New Layers podcast had to hit that high? Like, was that running in your mind?
Yeah, to some degree. The way I think about this is, if I'm going to invest my time in any project, any endeavor, it has to have some type of reward or payoff or something that makes the contribution, my time, worthwhile, right? Because I have a lot of projects going on. And if they're not yielding something for me in return, it's really hard to say I'm going to go do this thing. So for New Layer in particular, we decided that we would give it some time and just see as a casual conversation what could happen. And after about a year, 2 years, both Jasmine and I decided, it wasn't really getting the traction we wanted. It was not making us any money. It was not really like reaching any top 10 lists or anything like that. And so it felt almost like it was just her and I having a weekly conversation with each other, which we enjoy. But recording it, editing, producing it, it just didn't yield anything at all. apart from, a few tens of thousands of listeners, if that. And so it never felt like a worthy investment at the time.
So I think the stage at which you are in your career, if you're putting in your time, it seems to me that you have to have some kind of return on it, whether it's maybe access, maybe it's money. But it's so funny because like many moons ago, or many years ago, you started the infamous blog Creative Something, right?
Yes.
Do you remember what year was that when you launched it? When you pressed like we're
Yep.
going live?
Yeah. I think it was honestly like January 1st of 2008.
Wow. Oh my God. It's crazy because that's the year I literally enrolled in undergrad. So
Okay. Well, you're dating me now, but that's fine.
no, I'm just messing with you. But when you launched that blog, did you have like the same level of expectation? My assumption is that that was one of your first like project that really went like big. So did you have any expectation, or was it something like, let's just see where this goes?
Yeah, it was very much the latter. At the time when I launched Creative Something, I I had already built and shipped a number of web products, which had done reasonably well. I think at that point I'd actually sold a few of the web apps I had built on my own, and so like I'd seen some level of quote unquote success as an independent developer. And the idea for Creative Something really actually came from I was working in a design studio. Speaking of dating me, a design team inside of Hewlett Packard or HP
Oh,
long ago.
wow.
And yeah, I remember being there and everyone was talking about creativity. Like we have to introduce creativity to the product. We need to think more creative. And at the time I was not naive, but I just didn't know what creativity meant. I didn't know what people were intending to say when they said that word. So I said, okay, I want to go figure out what this creativity thing is. And I was so interested in the web. Tumblr was the big blogging platform at the time. So I said, I'm going to go learn about creativity and I'm just going to share what I learn and what I think as I go on this journey. And that was my only intention with the blog was to just share and almost like a public facing journal, which has really influenced a lot of my thinking these days. I wanted to just spend time understanding what creativity was, how it works, why it matters, all of those things. And I figured, why not just share in a public journal format? And so that's what I did for a good 10 years. I did that. And turns out a lot of other people were very curious about creativity and what that means as well.
Wait, I want to make sure I heard that correctly. 10 years.
Yeah, I blogged pretty regularly for a consistent 10 years. Yeah.
What is regular for you?
Oh my gosh, I can't even remember, honestly. It's been so long. I think I would try to get about 3 posts every week up. There was, I think, a solid month where I tried to do every single day, and it felt like I was forcing the writing, and I didn't want to do that. That was never the intention. The intention was always just to understand creativity, research some interesting things, and share those thoughts. So I didn't want to force it, and about 3 posts every week, I think, was standard for me.
That is insane because I've tried to do blogging. And at one point, it was like even getting one blog post a month was like a struggle. So I'm kind of curious to know, like, what got you going? Like, was it just like passion project? Was it like, hey, I've got the job at HP, so I don't have to worry about making the ends meet, so I can continue on this. So how are you balancing like the motivation with the financial needs and expectation from this?
Yeah. So at the time when I started the blog and even well into maybe 4 or 5 years into it, I had zero expectations for any return at all. Again, it was just more of a way for me to kind of share my explorations. And I always thought of it as really a public facing journal, meaning the ultimate value in the blog was for me to have somewhere to look in the future to kind of remind myself of the things I had learned or to inspire myself. Even today, however many years it is now, I often still go to the blog and there's a little random link. If you click that link, it takes you to one of the random posts. And I just, whenever I'm feeling uncertain about myself or uninspired, I can just go back to that public journal, click that link, and suddenly like new ideas will start to flourish. So that is ultimately what the goal was. I did have a full paying job throughout that entire time of blogging. Like I said, I wasn't really looking for any financial incentive. I wasn't even looking for really any type of return at all. I just knew I wanted to blog. And when people started replying to my posts or emailing me saying, this is really helpful or interesting, um, then I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because not only is it helping me, it's also apparently inspiring others. And it started bringing people to me to ask questions about creativity.
And you've had hundreds of thousands of views, right, on the blog? Like,
Yeah, I think at its peak it was somewhere, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere around 250,000 subscribers,
oh my
which
God, that's
was like
insane.
mind blowing to me at the time.
And when somebody reaches that kind of traction, they might wonder, like, let me just quit my day job. Let me just go all in on that. So, what made you say that, I think I'm going to keep the day job while I still continue this on the side?
I wish I had an answer for that. There have been a lot of times in my life where things have gone much better than I expected, much better than I think many people could really hope for. And throughout all of those times, whether it was apps I developed or products or the blog, I didn't want to quit my day job. And I think part of the reason for that for me was this famous quote, which I cannot remember, so I'm going to slaughter it as best I can. It's something along the lines of like, the moment you turn your passion into a job, it becomes work. And I didn't ever want to turn my fun projects into work. I wanted them to stay fun and almost be an outlet for my thinking and my process and my self development. Honestly,
Wow, that is so deep. Because I'm in a similar boat like you. Like, from day one, I didn't think about, monetization or, and if I were to do this full time, I wonder if I would lose the joy, because then it would be like, oh, things become like a chore. Like, oh, I got to schedule games. So right now there's this excitement because I also, just like you, have the day job that's, like making me not worry about all these things here.
yeah. How are you balancing that? Like you're in the thick of it right now.
I think for me, it was, like, with so many things in my life, like, it's embarrassing to admit it, but, I've started so many things, but never followed through on it. That's the, feedback my parents would always tell me. So this time around, I was like, you know what? I just don't like to myself, like, being in that place. I said, well, if I'm going to start this, I can't stop until I'm, you know, publishing 101 episodes. Then I give myself the permission to quit.
Mm.
Like no hard feelings. You did it. You did it for a decent amount of time. So you can walk away with honor. I'm at like 64, 65 episodes I've recorded so far. So in a good spot, like almost a little bit more than halfway. Um, and I have, even though I didn't seek out money, I've made it indirectly through partnerships and stuff.
Mhm.
But a lot of folks were like, why don't you just go and, you know, scale it and do all these things and make it into a business? And I said that that's the moment I think I'll lose interest. So like, this is like a playground for me to explore. And it keeps me sane, so to speak. It gives me an outlet to express my creativity. So that's
Yeah.
like, I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. Everything you're saying really resonates well with me, and I'm sure many, many others. It's hard too because the moment you turn something that's a curiosity into something that is more serious, there are now implications of that, and it's no longer like a fun project where you can wake up on a weekend and get excited about it.
Yeah.
No, it's like now you have to pay bills with that thing, and if you don't do all of the work that it entails, billing clients or
Yeah.
customers, talking with them regularly, making sure you have everything locked away and really, really strong and supported. Like there's a ton of work that's entailed with like making it a serious endeavor. If it's a side thing, then it's okay. It doesn't matter if you like forget one episode, right? It's totally fine. But when you're relying on it, when it's your business or your method of livelihood, it really adds a lot of pressure. Some people do well with that. I think the vast majority of us don't. We can't. Like it's better to preserve those things as an outlet and a fun thing that we can do on the side. If it makes us money, that's exciting. If not, that's okay too in most cases. The way that I personally think about all of these things, as you said at the beginning here, I've done a lot of different things. I always think of them not even as potential businesses. I don't think of them as potential ways to make a livelihood. I think of them as ways of exploring myself and understanding how I do things and how I think and the world around me. Because so much of our lives is consumption, right? We're consuming content, we're
Hmm.
consuming blogs, we're consuming everything. And these side projects are just a little way for us to see what creation is like and dabble in that world.
I think for me, it also keeps me sane in my day job. Like, there are a lot of times where we have our own frustration when you're working in companies, right? It's you don't have a blank canvas. You deal with a lot of stakeholders. And I was in that spot where, my work identity became my own identity. And that's like a very toxic place to be in. So having these playgrounds, so to speak, these side projects help me make sure that my creative identity is not the same as the work or the pixels I create at work.
Yes, so much that. Like one of the things that constantly tinkering has taught me is no matter what happens in my professional career, if I get laid off for some reason, if I just
Yes.
don't perform, I get fired, I'm going to be fine. I can do a ton of things in my life. I'm not reliant on someone else to give me the opportunity to make a living, right? I have a lot of options in front of me, no matter what a company or someone else might say. And so it's really empowering to have experience doing a bunch of small things. Now, I want to be clear here, and I always talk to my friends about this. I'm not a software engineer. I'm not. I am a spaghetti coder, which, if you don't know what that means, you basically take a whole bunch of random stuff, you throw it around in code, and you get it to work. If a real engineer were to take a look at my code on any of my products, which have been downloaded by millions of people, I bet that engineer would cry. They would be like, "What are you doing? This is so not optimal. This is wrong." But that's okay. I'm not trying to be an engineer. I'm trying to make things. But if I ever wanted to become an engineer, I bet I have a great start, right?
I love the optionality. I think there's something about it. Like it gives you, I think for me, it definitely helps me sleep better at night. Um, One thing I do worry though, is thinking about the day when I might have to sunset the Design MBA podcast, or even the thought of that is scary. And it makes me wonder that at the peak of it, you had, so many hundreds of thousands of views on the blog. It's going. And I wonder why on earth would you sunset that?
Yeah. So there's a few things here. The first is I think it's really important for us as creators and designers and builders to recognize that stopping something or quitting something is not the same as giving up. Like giving up means you're not even trying. Like you start the race and you do stop for some reason. But actually quitting something is a deliberate decision to say this has fulfilled its purpose. Or in my case, when it comes to like creative something, I grew as much as I wanted to grow from that experience. And I knew there were other things I wanted to do towards the end of its life, about 10 years later after I started it. Meaning, for me, I had spent 10 years writing about creativity. I started being noted in like actual publications and research journals as like a creativity expert. I got like the option to fly around the world and talk about creativity to people all
Wow.
over the world. And it was really fun and fulfilling. But after those years, I decided, creativity is interesting, but it's not who I want to be. I feel like I had grown enough in that arena. What I wanted to do next was design. I wanted to get back to what I really loved, which was design and craft and product design in particular. So after those 10 years, I said, well, maybe there's a way I can make this a little bit more of an incentive for me. So I started doing things like sponsorship deals. I got a book published as a result of the blog. A publishing company reached out to me and printed my first book, which was exciting. But after a while, even the financial incentive just didn't pay off. It didn't really get me excited in that area anymore. So I looked at the blog and I just said, it's time to move on. It's time to focus my attention. I think that's the key for me. If I were if I were doing anything else at that time, I'd want to dedicate myself 100% to that thing. And if I was doing creative something and something else, I couldn't do that. I couldn't really grow the way as I wanted to if I wasn't focused. So I decided to leave it be and move on to other things. I think like not even that long ago, I tried to pick it up again. I was like, maybe I'll start blogging again. That was really fun. And there was nothing there. It felt forced. It felt like I really wasn't interested. The blog had achieved what it needed to achieve for me.
I think I'm trying to think of an analogy. Like I really love chocolate ice cream. Chocolate is my favorite flavor, especially if it's like Belgian or Dutch chocolate.
Oh
So,
yeah.
once in a blue moon, I would love it. And then, but let's say you're like, hey, Janelle, I'm gonna like treat you to Belgian chocolate ice cream 30 days in a row. Now I love it, man. Like I love this ice cream. I can eat it every day, putting aside all the crazy sugar intake it is. But I feel like on the 30th day, I'm gonna be like, I think I've hit some kind of like peak or saturation with this flavor. And it almost sounds to me that regardless of the success and access and opportunities it was bringing, I mean, there's only so much one can be saying writing about the same topic for 10 years.
Okay, I disagree with that point. In fact, I have a blog post from back in the day that I did for an SEO company called Moz. They were called SEO Moz
Mhm.
at the time, and I think the blog post was called "How to Write" or "How to Blog About Anything" or something like that. And in that kind of article, I talk about my approach to even writing today, which is if you want to write about something or create content around something, there is an infinite amount of content that you could create. The trick is to get curious and to use a different like formula essentially to come up with those topics. So uh, I think if I wanted to, I could write about creativity my entire life, every single day, and never repeat subjects. Like I think that's just the lens that you have to take on those things. So I think that analogy is good. What I would use as an analogy for something like this podcast or creative something or new layer is like a really great pair of shoes, like a really expensive, nice, maybe
Yes.
one in the world kind of pair of shoes, right? Where you can do two things with that pair of shoes. You can put them on a wall and stare at them and defeat the purpose of having them, but maybe you enjoy looking at them. The other thing you can do is you can wear them. And over time, for some of us, over time, you're going to outwear them or you're going to wear them down. And you're going to realize it's time for a different pair of shoes. It's inevitable, right? Because you put them to good use. They served you well. They helped you get to where you want to go. They maybe attracted some attention, whatever your desire is, right? But over time, they do wear down. You get your tastes change. You're trying to do something else. And so you need a different pair of shoes. And so I think that's maybe more apt for how at least I think about things like projects. It's just you outgrow them.
I love that analogy. And I kind of wonder, you said that the financial incentives also not that maybe appealing to you at some point, but what if, let's say, financially you even made more than your day job or some other avenues? Would that just that number force you like to go through the phase where you've outlived the shoes, like you said, you've outlived them, you wanted to do other stuff, but then there's this big financial payoff. So do you think it would have forced you to stay in that or
No, I don't think so. And so the reason I can so confidently say that is because if we go back to the question of, well, what got you started in the blog, for example, it was always my own development. I wanted to learn things. And so over time, I did learn those things and no, it had nothing to do with money. Like even if I was making $1 million a year from the blog, at some point for me personally, I feel like it would have lost its value. No amount of money is worth me hating my day to day or feeling like I'm a slave to something else than what I like long for, right? I'm very privileged to say this. I want to recognize that. Like I do have the skills and the network and all of those things that equate to privilege to be able to say this. Not everyone has that. But for me personally, like it isn't about money. It is about that development and scratching that itch. So in an example like the blog, if someone were to come to me and say, we'll give you $1 million to do this blog, I would probably say, I'll take that $1 million, I'll sell the blog to someone else, and I'm going to go do whatever else next I want to do. Right. Because it's never been
wow.
about the money.
So exploring, wow. So it's like it's almost like like you have the golden handcuffs and some like it's like financially these things are designed to make you stay at the company, right? I mean, you worked in so many Bay Area companies and that you have all this stock that you leave on the table. But for us creative people, it's more than just the money. It's about that expression. And it makes me kind of like wonder about the similar journey you also encountered recently, which is you you are an IC designer. You worked at Facebook. You worked at Lyft. You also led design then from the IC at Atlassian and then at Lyft. From that point, you get this opportunity to become the head of design at Gem, right?
Yeah.
And that is an opportunity that so many people, like so many designers on behalf of them, if I were to say candidly, they would be like, oh my God, like Tanner's made it. He is the head of design at a hyper growth startup. I mean, a lot of people want to be there, and not to mention the
Yeah.
doors that will open after that. But I believe you are about to like embark on a new chapter from that position as well. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. I'm laughing a little bit because when I look at my career in hindsight, I can't help but focus on everything that feels like a misstep or feels like a mistake. So I want to come back to my current situation, but when I rewind time, man, leaving Facebook was really hard because,
Why?
I mean, honestly, there was millions of dollars that I was leaving on the table to leave. Right?
Oh my God.
There was the stock options, which when I left Facebook, for what it's worth, I think the stock was like $80 or something, and
Oh
a
my
few months
God.
ago it was like $300, $400. Like it was a lot of money. Um, but I left to see what being more of a formal IC leader kind of would be like and what that could do for my career. And then I went to Atlassian, which was a phenomenal company, and I learned it wasn't really right for me for various reasons. So then I had to change jobs again, and I felt like, wow, I should not have joined that previous company. I should have stayed at Facebook. And then I joined Lyft to work on autonomous vehicles. Super innovative, exciting space. Undoubtedly, I learned a ton, had a lot of impact, met some incredible people. But then I realized, autonomous vehicles is a really long product cycle. It's like 10 to 20 to 30 years. When what I was used to in my own projects and working at Facebook was like you turn a product around in a week and you get billions of people to use it. I don't want to wait 10 to 20 years for my work to do anything. So, eventually I did end up at Gem, where I was really fortunate to be their first design hire, to build out the design function there, connect with incredible people on a really powerful product. The business is doing phenomenally well, just incredibly well. But I realized that there was an opportunity for me to do something that I really was curious about and really passionate about, which is helping designers find jobs and helping businesses build processes to hire those designers. And I had spent my whole life working on these side projects, never really fully committing to them, right? And for the first time in my life, I feel like I can make that investment. I can make that leap. So leaving Gem behind, leaving that great world where I had learned a ton, leaving that behind and doing something else to learn something else. And so I think that's like a trend in my entire career is I'm very driven to learn a lot of things that I don't know and to take risks. I'm someone who I dropped out of high school when I was young.
Oh my God.
So I know, yeah, I didn't go to school. I'm self-taught, and
No way.
it's true. I think part of that for me is that I kind of recognize I'm not very smart. There's a ton of things I just
I'm not
don't know
either.
about the world.
I
Well,
make
why
it
do
up
you
in
say
house.
that? Why do you say that?
Well, because like, I mean, I don't have a degree from the United States, man. Like I came from
Mhm.
India from a college that nobody even knows about. Um I think when my parents decided to have two kids, I feel like all the brain went to my younger brother. And so he's like, like went to Ivy League and super smart, like in the context of education and books and like, and I'm more of I feel like more like street smart, like I make it up and like hustle and other avenues rather than like, oh, if you put me in a standardized testing and stuff like that, like or give me like 30 minutes with Figma and I'll create something that's like award winning. Like I'm not that guy.
Okay. There's something here though, which is how do you know you're not that guy? How did you learn that?
That's a very good question. I think a lot of it was putting myself in those shoes and then working with people who are like that. So, for example, um, like when you're hanging out with designers who are really good, like visually and stuff, and how they operate. Like initially, let's say you're delusionally telling yourself, like, "Oh, I can do this, I can do that." You try to, but let's say me and you go for a run using the shoe analogy, right? And you've been preparing for marathons for so many years and stuff. So when obviously I try to run with you, I'll see some difference. So whatever bubble I have in my head is going to get shattered and reality is going to sink in. Like, okay, this is what it means to run with someone who's pro, who's been practicing a lot. So I think that's where I recognize that, hey, there's all these designers who are even better than me visually, like just focusing on that part. But there's other areas I think I'm good at. Um, and then also there's this whole aspect of like what you gravitate towards. So that's how I personally recognize that, hey, I don't think I'm really book smart, but then I'm street smart. And also feedback from other people that you trust.
Mm, yeah, I love it. I think you're spot on. And you hinted at this a little bit, but it's worth calling attention to. People are smart in different ways, right? We all have
Yes.
different characteristics of our knowledge and how we use that knowledge. Uh, and I think that's really what it is. Is like I'm just a very aware that how much of the world operates is not an area that I'm really strong in. What I am strong in, however, is being scrappy and having grit and being willing to embarrass myself or make a failure, even publicly in many cases, because I've done it enough, sometimes on accident, sometimes intentionally. I've done it enough to know that those mistakes, those failures, those missteps, it just doesn't matter. Like most of the time, people really don't care. And these days, with the news cycle and the technology cycle, things are moving so fast. By the time you make a mistake, people have already forgotten about it. So for all of my successes, for example, that I've had in my career, I've had hundreds of failures, some very publicly, and it just doesn't matter. Like hardly anyone knows who I am. Hardly anyone knows what was up to 10 years ago. And so like I can use that.
Which, when you say a public failure, what comes to mind for you?
Oh my gosh. Let me think of a few. I don't know. Just look at my Twitter feed. Like I feel like not most of the things. I feel like a lot of the things that I share, for example, on Twitter or LinkedIn, I'm a prolific sharer. I like to post my thoughts and things often. A year later, I'll look back at some of those things and be like, what was I even saying? Like, that's so wrong. It's so misrepresented. So when we talk about like public missteps, I'd say those are probably the most obvious ones. Just go to my
Hmm.
feed and you're going to find something in there that's questionable. Um, but I don't stop doing it. And I don't shield away from those missteps because at least in the social media realm, the way I think about it and the way I actually publicly talk about it is my job is not to convince you that I'm right. My job is not to convince anyone that I'm doing the best thing or that you should pay me money to do something or anything like that. My job is to create, to not be a consumer, but to put things out into the world. And when you do that, two things happen. The first is you get feedback. You mentioned this in the way that you learn, right? Or the way that you kind of observed about that stuff. You get feedback. People cannot help but consume and then respond. And so you're going to get responses and you're going to learn from those responses. And then the second thing is people will find you inevitably from the things you put into the world. And those people who find you are going to fall into, one of two audiences. One is they don't care, they're going to disagree with
Hmm.
you, whatever. But the second audience are people who are like you or who want to know the things that you're kind of putting into the world. And they want to understand your exploration and your perception. And so the more you create, the more likely you are to draw in that audience, which then, feeds back into the first point. You're going to get more feedback, good and bad and constructive. And over time, you build what we call a network or an audience. And you can now leverage that audience to learn even more. So long story short, when I think about making those mistakes and things like that, I don't really think of them in terms of mistakes necessarily. I think it's just I'm exploring, and sometimes the exploration yields something that's not super positive, but there's always like a shining silver lining.
And you mentioned this, you just said that, hey, I prefer to be a little bit more scrappy. Um, and that is a little bit different from what the rest of the world expects to kind of like go on a standardized path, right? A lot of people, friends of,
Mhm.
um, people in our lives that want to follow a standardized path. So from the outside person looking into your career, I see, oh my God, Tanner's the head of design at Gem. Maybe he sticks along longer. The next step might be something like from there, you go to become the chief design officer at like a Fortune 100 company. Like I'm thinking in terms of standardized paths, right?
Mhm.
Like how people would graduate towards that. So is it wrong not to want a standardized path? Like, is there a universe where you could see yourself like still sticking it out there and going that standardized path, or you're like, you know what, this is the way I am, and this is the way I'm going to play my game?
Wow, what a question.
I know it's loaded. I didn't think about it.
Here's what I think is really funny about that. There is really no such thing as that linear path. No matter what we tell ourselves or what books and movies or our parents tell us, there is no linear path. I think the quote unquote linear path is something that we see in hindsight, and it's a story we tell ourselves, no matter what. So, some examples I can share with you. I'll start with my own story here. Um, if 20 years ago, I'm really old for what it's worth. If 20 years ago you had like found young Tanner and said, "Hey, this is where you're going to be," I couldn't even fathom how I got here. It makes no sense to me. One of my first jobs straight out of high school was in consumer market research. That's where I worked for many, many years. And from there, I went to online marketing because I thought there was some kind of connection there. In fact, the majority of my career to date has nothing to do with design. It is all in online marketing and SEO. In hindsight, however, I can create a narrative around my past experience to say that consumer research job got me to think about how I engage with people and the questions we ask them and how to glean insights. My experience in online marketing exposed me to the tech stack that search engines use and how we build these websites and how to build content that captivates audiences. And so now when it comes to design, I can take both of those lenses, research and interesting content, and apply it to my design. But I had no idea that was going to be the case when I was doing those jobs. I had no idea at all. So I think that the linear path for many people is it's not really linear. A lot of the friends I know, they went to school for things that they're lawyers. They went to school for law, and then they graduated and realized actually product design is interesting. I'm going to go do that instead. Like, what is the linear path there? There is no linear path. It's the path is only in hindsight that we see it linearly. Otherwise, it's we're all just kind of living in this moment, trying to make the best
Well,
decisions for
path
ourselves.
path meaning like from someone looking in, you're like, oh, he could just stay there and then eventually become the chief design officer. And then you also mentioned that you wanted to do this step because you now want to like for the first time focus in on the side project because previously you had the day jobs and you had the side projects going all in parallel. So then one wonders why not keep that going the same way as it worked before? Why now
Yeah.
decide to go all in on one?
Yeah. So you're right. For not necessarily a linear path, but a stereotypical or maybe cliche even career path would be to go from like head of design to design director, VP of design, chief design officer, maybe skipping some of those steps. That's certainly a pathway. Again, I think it just depends on what an individual wants to do. For me personally, this was an exploration again in learning about myself and my capabilities as a manager, as a functional leader in a company. It's the first startup I've ever worked at, which was extremely eye opening. And I think that actually is the reason that this is the right time for me to go off and do my own business with Shape because I've been at a startup. I've connected with a ton of incredible people. The board of directors is phenomenal there. Nick and Steve, the co-founders, the CEO, CTO, there at Gem, they have taught me an incredible amount. And I've realized through my experience there, okay, here's how a startup operates. And here's what you can do to make it successful. And now there's a bunch of other things that have fallen in place for me in my life where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to take those lessons and see if I can apply them, see what I can do. Um, and in some ways, that's also a very linear path, quote unquote. If you look out in the world, I know a ton of people who have gone from head of design or even first designer at a startup and then left to do their own thing. And so, like, is that a normal path? It can be, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because literally the episode I released today is with Jessica Ko, who was the head of design at Open Door,
Yeah.
and now is a founder at Playbook. So it's
At
you're
Playbook.
right.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
amazing.
And she's phenomenal, by the way. If listeners have not heard that podcast yet, I was listening to today actually. Highly recommend. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Now I got to ask you, like, in terms of like, to me, it seems like there's this theme that I'm seeing in your career, which is, and it's helping me understand also because at every point you have kind of prioritized your own development over just pure financial outcomes, whether it was leaving millions of dollars at Facebook, whether now we're the same craftsman, like somebody could say, just stay ahead of, design at Gem and then skip some ladders,
Yeah.
become the VP of design or chief design officer. But you said, hey, this is an area where I feel like I have an inkling, I can learn more. The shoes have worn out, time to get the next pair of shoes. Let's go on another trail. And you're doing that. But then I kind of wonder in this one, you're actually going all in on this one. So one has to wonder, what about financial security? Like, you may not have the day job that's coming in. So how are you dealing with that whole thing? Because usually for creatives, when they go all in on one, they're like, well, what about the money? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we were saying earlier, it becomes work. Like, the moment that my last paycheck comes in, I'm rolling off of the business right now. The moment that last paycheck comes in, that's it, right? There
wow.
is nothing else really. I am, again, very privileged and fortunate where I have a great wife who's doing well right now in her own career. And if we really need to, we have some savings and things like that. But one of the things I've learned over the years through my experiments is I can make money. Like, especially with the internet, you can launch a website overnight these days, maybe stick some ads on it. You can start an email list for no money and charge people $6 to subscribe. And if you just get a handful of people to subscribe to you, to listen to what you have to say, you can pay rent, right? You can
Yeah.
pay your mortgage, whatever you need to do. And so I've been making things online for very, very long, over 20 years now. And I've seen just how easy, quote unquote, it can be to get money. And with that said, because I've spent so long developing myself, my skill set, and my network, I feel like I could just flip a switch at some point and people would be like, yeah, Tanner, we're going to support you. Like, you're giving us a lot
Wow.
of great content. You're helping us with this product, whatever else, you've been doing over the years. We'll pay you $2, right? And if a few thousand people are going to pay you $2, which is a coffee for most people, I'm going to be okay. So the way that I'm approaching it, to be really clear here, everything I'm saying is like super privileged. It's almost ridiculously so. I know that a lot of people cannot do what I'm saying. That's not the point. The point is there are opportunities, and the internet has made it really not effortless, but much easier than it's ever been in history to find an audience, to find some revenue streams, to get a few extra dollars. Gumroad is super popular still. There's Patreon, there's Fiverr. Like, there are a lot of ways to build income if you're willing to put in the work, if you can put in the work. And so for me personally, I'm going to take 3 months and see if I can get this thing off the ground and start making a decent amount of money to at least support the business and see if I can really help designers and businesses find each other, because that's what I really care about. And if it doesn't work out, I can go join Fiverr. I can go be a designer on Upwork. I can go get another job. Like, it's not the end of the world, and it's not going to ruin my career. And if anything, it's going to help me. As with everything else I've done in my career, it's going to give me exposure to things I've never done before, bolster my skill set, expose me to new ways of thinking, and I can just take that knowledge to whatever I do next if it doesn't work out.
I am going to make my parents listen to this episode. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Because a lot of times, like when we are sitting at the dinner table, and they will be like, "Oh, you're making this much money at your day job," and so and so at like Amazon or Apple or Facebook is making this much. What if you join there?
Yeah.
Now, I am very much like, I know that if I were to join any of these companies, um, I I would probably double my comp, um,
Yeah.
at the minimum. Just talking to other designer friends, but I keep telling them that, like, what I like is the work life balance I have right now, which lets me like hustle and interview amazing people like you and build those relationships and learn. It's like I'm pursuing my real life MBA through the podcast and just meeting this. So that's important to me. Um, and I think hearing you talk about your journey just gave me that therapy, which is like you got to follow your intuition and stuff, and it's not just about following the standardized path. About just go and join a fan company and just make the bank. Because like me and you seem to be definitely, in a way, creative, weird people that don't want to follow like that's typical standardized path. So
Yeah. So I talk to a lot of designers. I do consulting here and there. And one of the things that often comes up is, Tanner, should I go get this other job that I know I'll make double the salary?
Hmm.
It's a little bit less in responsibility. It's at a company that I don't like their brand, but man, that money is going to change my life, right? And I always tell them, yes, that money will change your life. But at what cost? Like, what do you really want? Are you looking for that money, the financial incentive, or is there something else that you want to do with that money? In your case, I suspect, very similar to my own, if I had $1 billion, be doing exactly what I'm doing right now. I'd be talking to
Yes.
you on the podcast. Like, it changes nothing.
Yes.
And in some cases, like you mentioned earlier, it leads to handcuffs, the golden handcuffs, where you've got this desire to do something else, but man, that money is really nice and it's really hard to fight. So again, I think it all comes back to, like, what are you really trying to get? How are you trying to grow? What are your interests? If you optimize for those things, the rewards will come, but you got to really focus on what you want and what you need. For me, that's personal development, it's exploration, it's creativity and curiosity. And if I can, helping others. And I've found, if anything, in my entire career, if I can do those things, the financial stuff, it comes.
You're so on point because, like, even as I think about, like, there's two fears that I have with that. One is like, if I were to like join someplace with that insane amount of money, I think I'll lose all this desire to do stuff on the side because you're like, oh, it's all that money. So, I mean, it's a crazy like somebody telling you like, oh, I'm kind of scared to join like these big companies because I'll lose that itch that I have to continue hustling on these side things. And I don't know, I personally don't want that. I think like you, um, I also view that as like you can always go and get it. Like, I feel like I always go and join that company if need be. And I think in your case, you're like, I can always go and get another job and turn the light bulb on. But this thing that you're doing right now with Shape is that opportunity is now, and you feel like you have to seize it. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about what you're doing next with Shape, or is it like too early still to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out a little bit here. The gist of it is this: over my entire career in design, so many, many years now, I've talked with tons and tons of designers. And what I've realized, or what I've heard consistently, is even though there is ample resources to help designers learn their craft, visual design, product strategy, interaction design, even to some degree, prototyping, communication, that stuff, there's really not a lot of resources out there for designers on how to interview, how to present your work effectively. And so I'm going to go create, or I am creating, a platform that can bring designers together and help them learn how to really talk about their craft and their work in a way that hopefully gets them that next job, no matter what that job is. Additionally, I'm doing the kind of other side of that coin, where in my experience working at GEM as their head of design, I had to build a design interviewing process from scratch. And what I learned is there's really not a lot of resources out there to help founders build design leveling rubrics or interviewing processes. Like, what does that process look like? Should you do a design exercise or not? When should you do that? How do you evaluate a designer's chops, right? So I'm going to take both of those two sides of the coin around design interviews and create a platform to bring those people together, teach them how to do those things, and hopefully create opportunities on both sides.
Oh my God. I absolutely love that. Whew.
Yeah,
This
we'll
is
see.
just no, it's just like I get so I'm just getting so inspired listening to you just going after the next thing that you feel like your heart belongs to and just seizing that without always putting down to a number. And it's that creative spirit, if I were to call it something like that, it's protecting that is something I'm very passionate about. Like making sure that I don't kill it in the process just chasing money.
Yeah. The way I think about this, and you can tell your parents this, is this investment outside of working at like a FANG, outside of making millions and millions of dollars, it's an investment in yourself. And when you learn these skills, when you have this track record of being someone who builds things, well, that's where the money really is. Like, if you can prove to the world that you can create things that no one else is creating or doing, that is valuable, because any company is going to want to hire someone like you. Any company is going to want to say, this guy can go and create, this guy or woman or whatever can go and create things from nothing. And they're kind of motivated and they're curious and they know how to get things done. You can't teach that. They don't teach that in school, right? And so if it doesn't work out, someone's going to hire you and they're going to pay you well.
I feel so good. Just hearing that. So let me ask you this. Um, for any of the designers that have side projects out there, they're stuck in this dilemma that I've got the side project and I've got my identity tied to it, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily paying my bills, but I said I was going to start it and I'm doing it, but my heart's not in it anymore. And I feel like quitting. What'd you tell them?
Ooh. Remind yourself why you started in the first place. Go back to that. And if you don't know, take some time to figure it out. I remember when I stopped doing the Creative Something blog after 10 years, I really was afraid that my identity was wrapped up in this blog. I was that creativity guy, right? And I felt like I was abandoning a version of myself. And I was really afraid that no one would follow me. I would lose hundreds of thousands of followers online because I was shifting gears to design, to not be about creativity. And what I found was, again, my whole reason for doing anything is to try to understand things and to experiment. And that was my identity. My identity was not the blog. My identity wasn't even the subject. My identity is detached from both of those things. And it turns out when you're honest with yourself like that, and when you go out into the world and say, "Hey, I'm moving on," a lot of people will appreciate that. And yeah, you'll lose people and you'll lose some energy and you'll have hard days for sure. But at the end of the day, like there's something else there. And if you know what that is, it's not so scary anymore. And you can even tell people about that thing. And as a result of that, you'll get more of people following you and a better audience, and they'll care just as much about the previous thing you were doing because it's you. It's you're the product, you're the thing, right?
I think is if I think about the question you just said to ask yourself, like, why you started in the first place? What is your identity? When I think about the podcast and this endeavor, coming back to like my fear, I think what I like about it is more than just the growth or anything else. Is just being able to meet awesome people like you, and that's the part that keeps me going. That's why I don't see an end date necessarily or quitting, because it's like, oh my God, you get to meet all these awesome people, and this is an amazing way that opens up doors for you. That's what keeps me going. Um, like that curiosity to learn from other people's mental models. Like you are many steps ahead of me in many ways, and I can always listen back to this episode. Um, and for me, it's about building those relationships. I feel like where I can always shoot you an email, be like, "Hey Tanner, like just wanted your thought on that," because you don't always have books for these kind of things. Like it's in the making. So I don't know. Like for me, that's the why that keeps me going, and I still haven't thought about like the day when it quits.
And that's great. Like, why would you? Why would you think about the end date? It'll inevitably come, maybe 40 years from now or whatever. Um, but the thing that will never go away, will never end, is what you've gained as a result of this endeavor. Like you as a human being, as an individual, literally the substance of your brain, the neurons will have been forever changed and shaped because of this. And so as long as you're locked into that drive, that connection, that relationship building, that inspiration, you're going to be fine. And look at you giving that back to the world as well, right? There's got to be something there where it's not only you that's changing, it's me, it's your guests, it's listeners. We're all changing because of you, because of this thing that you're willing to spend a little bit of your time on. Like that's pretty powerful, I think.
Thank you so much, Tanner. How can listeners find you or contact you?
Yeah, pretty easy. I'm just tannerc.com, or just Google me. You'll find all of my various endeavors out there.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Tanner, for coming on the show. This has been phenomenal. Blast.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time and for that fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.